about the challenges that we face. I'm not justifying or rationalizing our less than perfect system, nor am I pretending that problems do not exist. I know we have on occasion stumbled, we've made mistakes and misread circumstances, and I'm sure we're expected and will likely make mistakes in the future. But these perplexing desires by many to highlight the negative makes us wonder sometimes of what people want from us. This is not a question of the glass being half empty or half full. To some individuals, the glass has a permanent sieve. So why is this? Why are these stories and pontifications by some scholars, by some bloggers, only focusing on the negatives? Many of the reasons are clear. Lack of true knowledge of what's going on in the region. Sometimes it's just pure bias. Sometimes it's the desire for one to make a name of oneself by being provocative regardless of accuracy. It has become very successful cottage industry, one whose benefits achieve nothing towards the goal they proclaim or want, i.e. a better Kurdistan or a more democratic Iraq, but it only serves their personal purposes. Most reporters who now cover Iraq have a history of the country that starts from 2003 at best. They know little of the past, almost never visit the Kurdistan region, let alone spend time there. They purely and simply do not know Kurdistan. It is telling to compare what is written or said by those who know the full story and history. The coverage is remarkably different. This past election proves that. The coverage was detailed and fair, instructive, objective, and also educational. It is time that people got to truly know Kurdistan. Our elections opened many eyes. We hope that minds will also be opened. We know that there are no shortcuts to democracy. It is hard work, but the destination is worth it. Democracy is the toughest political system in the world to achieve because it is the best. In our journey towards democracy, we will make many mistakes. We will learn from them, and hopefully we will not repeat them. We will, and from those mistakes, and from much greater that is being done correctly, the foundations of our democracy can become stronger. From 2000 until 2005, there was remarkable growth in democratic freedoms in the Kurdistan region. It has slowed down since then, but it is still moving forward. And the July election, among other things, gave it tremendous new momentum. Difficult issues remain, and the journey faces tough terrain, but we are still moving forward. This is not a sprint, and it should not be. This is the foundations of our future, for our children and our grandchildren, for Kurdistan and also for Iraq. At the beginning of these remarks, I quoted our Homer's view of the journey and the destination. Homer has a relevance not just for the statement. It was the Greeks who first developed the principles of democracy, and that the world has been built around that. Developed by the Greeks, idealized by the Americans, democracy in all of its forms remains the most promising form of government ever developed. We in the Kurdistan region are on that journey to that destination. Someday we will get there. I guarantee it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for that. I'll start with a question. You spoke about the establishment of an independent judiciary and other reforms. Can you give me some specifics as to what sort of reforms the KRG will be implementing in trying to address charges of corruption and problematic governance?
Well, this initiative that we've launched with assistance from PwC is very much a comprehensive approach to dealing with corruption. We understand that there is a problem of corruption in Kurdistan, but we also understand that the perception of corruption is actually much greater than the actual corruption that exists there. And we're confident that a lot of what is currently perceived as corruption can be addressed with just better governance. So looking at our own government procedures, how do we procure things? How do we tender projects? How do we follow up on tendered projects? How do we award contracts to companies? These kinds of things, rather than being done by the emotions of a minister, should go through institutions. And that's the kind of thing that we're looking to address here. We're not interested in finding that one corrupt official and making him or her the scapegoat for dealing with corruption. We're looking at this in a far more comprehensive way of building institutions, finding the correct ways of doing things, putting in best practices that can ultimately make it very difficult for corrupt officials to be corrupt. It's also about just changing the way we do things, making this less of a patronage-based system, making it a far more of a merit-based system that we have in the region. And I think this is part of the challenge that we face now. And in reality, it's a good challenge to be facing. It shows that we have actually made significant progress for us, for this to be our major concern right now. Having dealt with the security threats, we can actually start focusing on these issues. The judiciary becoming independent was a very important step for Kurdistan. But now we need to raise the capacity of the judiciary. We need to not only pass laws that are good, that are modern, that are transparent and are in line with international standards, but we need to have the institutions of state that can uphold those laws. And I think we're seeing this evolve quite interestingly in our press law. Our press law passed last year decriminalized libel. But it took time for the judiciary to kind of adapt to this new law, because for so long they were used to working under an old Ba'ath-era law that put people in prison for writing slanderous material. That's changed. People are not being put in prison now, and it took time for the judiciary to realize that it's not business as usual. You have to move on, and we're hopeful that we can apply this kind of institutional reform in other aspects, in other sectors of government.
Questions? We've got a man in the back here.
Hi,
Yeah.
Maurice Shachet from the Washington Institute. Thanks for your eloquent lecture. I would like to ask about how do you see the election's outcome in terms of negotiations with Baghdad about solving the two main issues, which are dividing the outcome of the oil revenue and solving the dispute over the territories between Iraq's Arab region and Kurdistan regions. And do you see that some kind of coalition will be established towards the elections next January between some of the Kurdish lists, let's say Al-Kurdistaniya, and the coalition headed by the Iraqi Prime Minister al-Maliki? Thanks.
Thank you for excellent questions. I genuinely believe that these elections were much more about Kurdistan than they were about Iraq. And to look at the way people voted and why people voted the way they did, it had very little to do with policies at a national level. It had much more to do with the delivery of services, the effectiveness of the government, the transparency issues, claims of corruption. And again, I consider that a very healthy evolution, because it's going to hold our government far more accountable to domestic, local issues rather than more national and strategic issues. Having said that, now that we have the elections out the way, now that our cabinet is being formed, once the cabinet is formed, we can continue along the path to our negotiations with Baghdad. Prime Minister Maliki's welcome visit to the Kurdistan region restarted this process. It'll be followed on by delegations to Baghdad. Bear in mind that in January, as you noted, we have federal elections coming up, national elections. So we have a small window of time between now and when the campaigning for the national election heats up, to try to make progress on some of the outstanding issues. Nobody's expecting us to resolve all of the issues between now and, say, the end of the year. But we certainly do have a small window of opportunity, I would say, between now and October, to try to tackle some of these key issues. I think that on the oil revenue sharing law, we're not that far apart. We have made significant progress over the years to get to a position that is close, that I feel confident that we can reach agreement on. And we have made enormous progress. The Kurdistan region has begun exporting oil for the very first time, and that oil export agreement was reached between the federal and regional governments. So we've set a precedence of making progress. We're confident now that oil is flowing, and we've made it clear that it is our intention to boost national production, to increase Iraq's national export, to increase Iraq's national treasury, that this will in fact reduce some of the sensitivities that people had in Baghdad about the Kurds going off and doing their own thing on oil. The issue of disputed territories and Iraq's disputed internal boundaries is a little more complicated, but nonetheless it needs to begin to be addressed. The discussions need to continue ongoing. We're waiting for the next